former Navy SEAL drove into his grandmother's snowbound hometown. After a neighbor called with one warning, a life was fading in the snow. On a deserted road, he found an old canine German shepherd chained to a sign, starving and wounded. Then he saw the cracked collar and realized this dog was the gift he once left with her. The nor'easter came into Bar Harbor like a white wall rolling off the Atlantic, swallowing the shoreline, the spruce trees, and the narrow black ribbon of shore road. By midnight, snow had piled against the lobster shacks, and the harbor bells rang in the dark with a lonely iron sound. Ryan Keller was packing a duffel in Virginia Beach when his phone began to buzz on the edge of a motel sink. He was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark brown hair, gray-blue eyes, a thin scar through his left eyebrow, and hands that looked as if they had been carved by rope, salt, and hard weather. He almost let the call go. Unknown numbers had never brought him peace. Then he saw the Maine area code, and the room seemed to narrow around the little green screen. "Ryan Keller?" a woman's voice asked. It was old, sharp, and shaking under its own effort. "This is Nora Whitcomb from next door to your grandmother's place." Ryan gripped the sink. Ruth Keller had been dead 6 months, and still her name could strike him harder than any door breach. "Is the house on fire?" he asked. "No," Nora said, and the wind behind her voice hissed as if she were standing with a cracked window open. "Something is dying out on Shore Road, and it has your family's collar on it." Ryan did not ask another question. He had spent too many years learning that the worst messages did not need decoration. He drove north before dawn through sleet in Connecticut, black ice in Massachusetts, and a Maine highway that grew emptier with every mile. The old field jacket Ruth used to mock as funeral-colored lay on the passenger seat. His father's battered military watch ticked on his wrist. Every time the wipers dragged snow from the glass, memory tried to climb in. Ruth on her porch with a mug of coffee. Ruth telling him not to confuse discipline with goodness. Ruth waving him away the morning he left for the teams, pretending her eyes were red from wood smoke. He had missed her calls during a deployment. Then he had missed the funeral because a contract delay kept him across the world. That was what men like him called it. A delay. The heart knew better. By the time he reached Bar Harbor, daylight was only a bruise behind the storm. Snow fell so thick that houses appeared and vanished like things remembered in fever. Nora's directions led him toward a closed stretch of shore road where orange barricades leaned under ice. His truck crawled between drifts higher than the tires. The sea was hidden, but he could hear it beyond the road, dull and heavy, beating under the storm like a giant heart. Then he saw the shape beside the sign. At first it looked like a heap of wet canvas. Then it lifted its head. Ryan hit the brakes. The German shepherd was chained to a bent road sign with a length of rusted steel and a padlock half-packed with ice. Snow had filled the hollows along his ribs. His sable coat was black and gray along the back, tan at the chest and legs. All of it dulled by cold and hunger. His muzzle was silver white. One ear carried an old tear. His right front leg hung wrong, wrapped in frozen blood where the chain had rubbed and cut. He was so thin Ryan could count the bones beneath the fur. Still, when Ryan opened the truck door, the dog bared his teeth. Not wild, trained, hurting, but trained. "Easy," Ryan said. The wind threw snow into his mouth. The dog growled low. The sound scraped raw from an empty body that had refused to quit. Ryan crouched in the road and kept his hands open. "I am not here to hurt you." The dog's eyes fixed on him. They were cloudy with age, but somewhere inside them a sharper light remained. Ryan saw the cracked red leather collar then. His breath stopped. There had been a collar like that once, bought in San Diego by a younger man who still believed he could send love home by mail. Ryan moved closer. The dog lunged half an inch, then folded from pain. His chain rattled against the sign. Ryan saw the small brass tag crusted with ice and wiped it with his thumb. Valor. The road vanished. For 1 second, Ryan was back in a blown-out courtyard overseas, smoke in his throat, a younger, sable shepherd pressing against his leg while alarms wailed and men shouted through dust. Valor had found him under a collapsed wall. Valor had refused to leave. After the dog's retirement, Ryan had brought him to Ruth because both of them were too loyal and too lonely for their own good. Ruth had taken one look at the canine and said, "I suppose this one has better manners than you." Ryan had laughed because it was easier than saying goodbye. "Valor," he whispered. The dog froze. Snow collected on Ryan's shoulders and eyelashes. He lifted his left hand, palm down, 2 fingers curled, the old, silent command for hold. Valor's growl broke. His nose moved toward Ryan's wrist. He smelled the watch. Ruth had worn it for a week after Ryan's father died, then given it to him when he left home, because she said every man needed something that kept time after pride made him late. Valor's eyes changed. Not soft exactly. Wounded recognition was not soft. It was a door opening in a house thought burned down. The old dog pressed his silver muzzle against the watch and made a sound too small for the storm. Ryan had a bolt cutter in the truck. His hands shook when he used it, not from the cold. The chain snapped with a metallic cry, and Valor sagged at once, all the strength he had saved for resistance leaving him in one terrible breath. Ryan wrapped him in the charcoal field jacket and lifted him. Valor weighed almost nothing. That was the worst of it. Ryan had carried wounded men, ammunition crates, water cans, and guilt enough to bend the spine. This old dog weighed less than any of them, and hurt more. "I have you," Ryan said. Valor did not fight. But as Ryan turned toward the truck, the old shepherd snapped his teeth gently into the sleeve of Ryan's jacket and pulled. Not hard. Deliberate. Ryan followed the line of his gaze through the blowing snow. Beyond the barricade, past the road that should have been empty, stood a faint porch light on a white house near the harbor. Ruth's house. "No," Ryan said, though he was not sure whether he meant the dog, the storm, or the ghost of his grandmother making demands after death. Valor pulled again. Then his head dropped against Ryan's chest. Ryan put him in the back seat on a wool blanket, climbed behind the wheel, and drove toward the house with his jaw locked so tight his teeth ached. The porch light flickered as he pulled into the drive. Nora Whitcomb stood on the porch in a red parka too large for her small frame, white hair cut blunt at her jaw, brown eyes bright with fear and fury. Her gloved hands flew to her mouth when she saw the dog. "Oh, Valor," she said. Ryan opened the truck door. "Who chained him out there?" Nora looked past him toward the road, and for the first time, her anger seemed afraid of what it knew. "That is not the only question Ruth left you." Valor stirred inside the blanket, his old head lifted with effort. Something slid from beneath the cracked collar, caught on a fold of fur, and dropped onto the seat. Ryan picked it up. It was a small strip of oilcloth, sealed against weather, folded twice, and tied with faded blue thread. Ruth's handwriting covered the inside in tight, slanted letters. "If the lanterns go dark, follow him." Ryan looked at Valor. The old canine stared back through the storm, and in that look, Ryan understood with a coldness deeper than snow that his grandmother had not called him home only to say goodbye. Morning did not arrive in Bar Harbor so much as reveal a paler shade of storm. Snow beat against Dr. Laura Hayes's clinic windows, and the parking lot outside had become a shallow white sea, with the tops of buried tire tracks showing like old scars. Ryan carried Valor through the clinic door, while Nora pushed it open with both shoulders, and a word she would later insist was not fit for church. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, damp wool, coffee, and frightened animals. A kerosene heater clicked near the reception desk because the power had already failed twice since dawn. Dr. Laura Hayes came out of the exam room with a towel in one hand and a stethoscope around her neck. She was compact and strong, with black hair threaded in silver and pulled into a rough knot, dark eyes that missed very little, and a navy fleece jacket dusted with white hair from half the county's pets. Her face changed when she saw the bundle in Ryan's arms. "Table," she said. "No hello, no questions." Ryan liked her immediately for that. He set Valor down as gently as he could, but the old shepherd flinched and bared his teeth at the ceiling. Laura did not pull back. She lowered her hand and let him smell the back of her glove. "I remember you," she murmured. "You bit my sleeve in 2019 and looked offended when I billed Ruth for it." Valor's ears moved. Nora made a sound that tried to be a laugh and failed halfway. Ryan stood by the table, his hands useless at his sides. In other rooms, in other countries, he had known exactly what to do with blood panic and wounded bodies. Here, with the old dog watching him like a question he had avoided for years, every movement felt too late. Laura cut away the crusted fur around Valor's right front leg. The wound was deep, rubbed raw where the rusted chain had tightened and frozen. There were smaller cuts along the chest and neck bruises under the coat, and the dull collapse of a body that had not eaten enough for days. "How long?" Ryan asked. Laura's jaw shifted. "Long enough." That was not an answer. It was worse. Valor growled when the needle went in, but he did not snap. Ryan gave the old hand signal again. Palm down, hold. Valor obeyed. His whole body trembled with it. Laura noticed the signal and looked at Ryan. "Military working dog." "Mine," Ryan said, then swallowed. "Once." Nora took off her wet gloves by the heater, finger by finger, buying time before she spoke. "After Ruth died, he stayed near the house." Her voice had the brittle steadiness of a woman who had made herself useful because grief left no other job. "Some nights he would vanish before a storm." "Vanish where?" "To people Ruth used to check on." Laura worked in silence, cleaning the wound with a care that made Valor shiver. Nora looked at the snow-dark window. "Agnes Bell's porch, Samuel Pike's trailer, the Hollis place near the bay." Ryan's eyes lifted at that last name, but Nora continued. "He would show up before the lights went out, or before the road drifted shut." "A dog does not make a route plan," Ryan said. Nora gave him a look Ruth would have approved of. "No Commander Keller, but a dog remembers who fed him, who cried into his fur, and where Ruth put him in the truck every Thursday." "I am not a commander anymore." "Then stop standing like one." Laura's mouth twitched without mercy. Ryan almost smiled. Almost. Valor tried to raise his head when a siren cried somewhere beyond the clinic. The sound came thin through the storm, twisted by wind into something too much like the past. The old dog's eyes went wide. His injured leg jerked beneath Laura's hands. "Hold him," she said. Ryan moved close, but did not grab. "Valor." The canine strained toward the door, breath fast, teeth clicking once from cold and fear. Ryan remembered another alarm, another doorway. The decision to send Valor forward. Because that was what handlers did when the mission demanded it, and the dog trusted them enough to run into danger. Valor, Ryan said again, softer. He made the old hand sign, 2 fingers down. Stay. The shepherd stared at him. For a terrible moment, Ryan saw that the command was not enough. Valor had been obeying another order for months, one older than pain. Then the dog lowered his head. Not peace. Control. Laura exhaled and finished the bandage. He needs warmth, fluids, antibiotics, food in small portions, and no more heroic nonsense. Valor's tail flicked once, weakly. Nora sniffed. He understood the last part and rejected it. Most males in this town do, Laura said. Ryan looked down at the red collar. Someone chained him. The clinic door opened before Nora answered. Calvin Rhodes stepped inside with snow on his expensive black coat and irritation already arranged across his face. He was a lean man in his early 50s, with pale blonde hair combed too carefully for weather, narrow eyes, and polished boots that looked personally offended by slush. "I heard you found the dog," he said. Nora's shoulders rose like hackles. Laura did not look up from Valor's chart. "The dog has a name." Calvin removed one glove. "I am aware." Ryan turned toward him. "Who are you?" "Calvin Rhodes." He gave the name as if it should unlock doors. "I am handling the estate transfer on the Keller property." Ryan felt something cold move behind his ribs. "There is no transfer." "There will be once the paperwork is corrected." Nora made a sharp sound. "Corrected is what men say when they want to steal something politely." Calvin ignored her. "The animal has been interfering with inspections, frightening contractors, and creating liability." Valor lifted his head at Calvin's voice. Not panic. Recognition of a threat. Ryan stepped closer to the man. "Did you chain him on Shore Road?" Calvin's face tightened just enough. "Absolutely not." "But you know who did." "I know that a dangerous dog cannot be allowed to roam during a blizzard." Laura set the pen down. The room became very quiet except for the heater and the wind. "Dangerous?" she asked. "He was nearly dead." Calvin looked at the bandaged leg. For 1 second, discomfort reached him. Then money smoothed it away. "I am sorry if the animal suffered, but there are practical matters." Ryan took one slow breath. In the old life, anger had been easy because it came with a target and permission. Here, Ruth's house waited in the storm. Valor was shaking on a steel table, and the man in front of him smelled like paperwork overwrought. "Leave," Ryan said. Calvin opened his mouth. Ryan did not raise his voice. "Now." Calvin glanced at Nora, at Laura, at the dog, then back at Ryan. "This is not over." "Good," Nora said. "I am old and I need hobbies." The door shut behind him. Snow rushed in and vanished. Laura wrapped Valor's leg and gave Ryan a bag of medicine cans of soft food and instructions sharp enough to pin to a man's chest. If he runs on that leg, he may lose it. He will not run. Valor stared at the door. Nobody believed Ryan. They brought him back to Ruth's house just before noon. The old white place stood near the harbor, under a roof loaded with snow, its porch rails buried to the middle, its windows dark, except for the stubborn lamp Nora had left burning. Ryan carried Valor inside. The house smelled of cedar, salt, old paper, wool, and the faint sweetness of Ruth's peppermint tea. Valor went still in his arms. He was home. Ryan laid him on a blanket beside the cold stove while Nora lit kindling. For a few minutes, the old shepherd seemed to sink into warmth. His eyelids lowered, his breathing eased. Then a board creaked somewhere below the kitchen. Valor's head snapped up. "No," Ryan said. The dog ignored him. He pushed himself upright, pain rippling through his legs, and limped toward the hallway with a stubbornness so pure it was almost insulting. Ryan followed, cursing softly. Valor stopped at a narrow door beneath the stairs. The basement door. It was locked with a brass key still hanging on a nail nearby, as if Ruth had left the next step where only the faithful would notice it. Valor pressed his nose to the crack under the door and looked back at Ryan. Not begging, ordering. Ryan took the key. Behind him, Nora whispered, "Ruth, what did you do?" The lock turned and cold darkness breathed up from below. The basement beneath Ruth Keller's house held the cold with the patient discipline of stone. Outside Bar Harbor disappeared under a thick curtain of falling snow, while inside the narrow stairs smelled of dust, sea salt, old pine boards, and the faint medicinal sweetness of stored bandages. Ryan went down first with a flashlight in one hand, and Valor pressed close behind him despite the bandage on his leg. "You are supposed to be resting," Ryan muttered. Valor limped down one step, paused, breathed through the pain, and took another. Nora followed with a lantern, and the expression of a woman prepared to scold the living and the dead in equal measure. At the bottom, the beam of Ryan's flashlight found shelves. Not junk shelves, organized shelves. Ruth's handwriting appeared on tape labels stuck to plastic bins and wooden crates. Blankets, batteries, canned soup, soft pet food, insulin cooler packs, hand warmers, salt, radio parts. If kindness could be made into inventory, Ruth had done it with a pencil and no patience for excuses. Ryan stood there while the storm worried the house above them. She was running supply out of her basement. Nora lifted the lantern. Ruth called it keeping extra. This is not extra. That is why she never asked your permission. Valor moved past them toward the far wall. His nails clicked on concrete, each step uneven. Ryan wanted to lift him, but something in the old dog's body said no. Not pride. Purpose. Valor stopped beside a workbench where a faded green tarp hung over stacked crab traps. He pushed his nose beneath the tarp and made a rough sound deep in his chest. Ryan pulled the tarp back. Behind the traps was a loose square of plywood. Under it sat a blue tin box wrapped in oilcloth. The lid had been painted with 3 words in Ruth's small, slanted hand. Harbor Lantern Watch. Nora covered her mouth. Ryan set the tin on the bench and opened it. Inside were folded maps, a weatherproof notebook, 2 handheld radios, a bundle of keys on labeled tags, and 12 yellow cards tied with red string. He untied the cards slowly. Each one carried a name, an address, and notes so specific they felt almost intimate. Agnes Bell, eyes failing. Porch freezes on east side. Will open for Valor before people. Samuel Pike, oxygen machine, generator stubborn, pretends coffee is food. Evelyn Marsh, waits by window, too proud to call. Ask about the cat. Arthur Hollis, will say no, ask twice, then go anyway. Ryan read them in silence while Nora's lantern trembled. There were phone numbers, medication reminders, road conditions, spare key locations, animal names, birthdays, and small warnings written in the plain language of someone who had cared enough to notice what pride tried to hide. He had seen mission folders with less detail. "She never told me," he said. Nora's eyes softened and did not let him off. "She wrote." The word landed between them. Ryan's thumb stilled on the cards. On a lower shelf sat a shoebox tied with blue thread. His name was written across the top envelope. Ryan Keller. The letters were neat, steady, and old. He could not touch it, not yet. Some things were easier to face under gunfire than in a grandmother's basement. Valor nosed the yellow cards. His silver muzzle came to rest beside Arthur Hollis's name. "He cannot read," Ryan said. Nora looked at the old dog. "No, but he went with her every week." She leaned one hip against the workbench, suddenly tired. "Ruth had a system before storms. The lanterns, yes." Nora lifted the lantern in her own hand. One light in the front window meant all right. 2 meant need a check. 2 meant bring supplies. Nora's mouth tightened. No light meant go now. Ryan looked at the map. 12 addresses had been marked with pencil circles around the harbor, along Otter Creek near the edge of Acadia, and out by the bay roads, where snow could close a life inside a house before anyone missed it. Why were these unfinished? Nora's hand moved to her throat. Because Ruth died before the last storm cleared. The basement seemed to grow colder. How? Nora stared at the card in Ryan's hand. A tree came down near the harbor road. I heard it was a fall. She fell because she was out checking on someone. Ryan's stomach folded in on itself. Nora went on because mercy sometimes had to be exact. She had Valor with her. The old shepherd lay down suddenly, as if the words had weight. His injured leg stretched awkwardly. He came back alone, with blood on his coat and Ruth's scarf in his mouth. Ryan closed his eyes. Valor had not only been grieving, he had been trying to finish the route. For 6 months, the old canine had been carrying Ruth's work in his body, because no one had known where she left the plan. No wonder he had run toward dark houses. No wonder he had fought the chain. No wonder he had nearly died on the road, rather than abandon the storm. Ryan opened his eyes and saw the basement the way Ruth must have seen it. Not as storage, as readiness. Blankets before frostbite, medicine before panic, soup before hunger became shame, company before silence became a room with locked doors. Nora touched the shoebox of letters. She stopped mailing them during your last deployment. Why? She said you were carrying enough. Ryan laughed once. It came out rough. That was not her choice. No. Nora's voice did not change. Answering the earlier ones was yours. It would have been kinder if she had shouted. Valor raised his head, ears lifting as wind slammed the basement window. Somewhere above, a tree branch scraped the house. Ryan looked at the 12 yellow cards. Who else knows this exists? No one knew where the final box was. Grace Hollis. Nora's eyes flicked toward him. Deputy Grace knows pieces. Arthur is her father. Yes. Why is his card last? Nora drew in a breath. Because Ruth worried about him most. Ryan waited. Nora adjusted the lantern wick, though it did not need adjusting. Arthur worked the old light station before it went automated. He lives alone. Since his wife died. Grace checks on him. Grace tries. The old woman looked toward the stairs. He does not let trying people in. Ryan gathered the cards and the notebook. The act felt strangely formal, as if he were taking custody of more than paper. Valor pushed himself up again. No, Ryan said. The shepherd ignored him and pressed his nose against the basement wall where another map hung, half hidden behind a coil of rope. Ryan pulled it down. It was an older chart of the harbor roads, with alternate paths marked in Ruth's hand. Arrows, tide notes, dangerous drifts, houses where the lights were supposed to be visible from the road. At the top, she had written, Follow the dark windows. Ryan felt the old military part of his mind wake. The storm was not background. It was enemy terrain. The people on those cards were isolated points. Valor was wounded, but he was also the only living witness to Ruth's route. "We start close," Ryan said. Nora's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Agnes. Agnes. Valor's tail struck the floor once. Weak. Certain. Ryan lifted the shoebox of letters, then set it back down. "Later," he whispered. Nora did not press him. Above them, the house groaned under the snow. Ryan climbed the stairs with the yellow cards under his arm and Valor limping behind him, one painful step at a time. At the kitchen door, the old dog stopped and looked toward the front window. Across the road, through the white fury of the storm, one porch light flickered out. Then another. The harbor was going dark. The next morning over Bar Harbor was a gray bowl packed with snow-low clouds and wind that had learned every crack in every window. By 8 o'clock, roofs sagged under white weight. The harbor road had vanished beneath drifts, and the town looked as if it had been erased with a cold hand. Ryan spread Ruth's map across the kitchen table and weighed the corners with mugs, batteries, and one can of dog food Valor had refused, until Nora informed him that manners were not optional in this house. The old K9 lay near the stove, bandaged legs stretched out, sable coat brushed clean, but still thin over sharp ribs. He watched the yellow cards with the solemn focus of a soldier listening to orders. Nora stood at the counter in a navy sweater and heavy boots, white hair tucked behind both ears, pouring coffee that smelled strong enough to restart a dead truck. "Agnes Bell first," Ryan said. 3 streets down. 2 in weather like this, Nora said. Streets shrink when the Lord decides to test local government. Valor pushed himself up. "No," Ryan said. Valor took one uneven step toward the door. Ryan looked at Nora. Nora sipped her coffee. "I would not start a battle you are emotionally unprepared to lose." "He can barely stand." "He heard you." Valor stared at him. The dog did not beg. He never had. Begging was for animals who believed humans were in charge. Ryan crouched and touched the bandage. "Short distance." Valor blinked. "You ride most of it." The tail moved once. It was not agreement. It was an insultingly generous compromise. Ryan loaded a sled with rock salt blankets, a toolbox, a small space heater, soft pet food, and the battered radio from Ruth's basement. He placed Valor on a folded quilt in the back of the truck for the first mile, then parked where snow blocked the street and moved the dog to the sled. Valor accepted this with the expression of a decorated officer forced into a parade float. Nora walked beside them, leaning into the wind, carrying a tin of biscuits under her arm, because she said old women open doors faster for baked goods than badges. Agnes Bell's house was pale yellow beneath a heavy hat of snow, with white trim nearly swallowed by ice, and 2 bare lilac bushes clicking in the wind. The front path had been shoveled once badly, and the east side of the porch glittered under a skin of invisible ice. Before Ryan knocked, the curtain moved. The door opened a chain's length. Agnes Bell peered out. She was a narrow woman with clouded blue eyes, silver hair braided over one shoulder, and a cardigan buttoned wrong over a flowered dress. She held a wooden spoon like a weapon from a kinder age. "I told Nora I was fine." "You told my answering machine," Nora called. "That is legally not the same as telling me." Agnes sniffed. Then she saw Valor. The spoon lowered. "Oh, my brave boy." Valor lifted his head from the sled. His ears twitched toward the house. "Not toward Agnes," past her. Ryan smelled it a second later. Hot plastic. Faint smoke. The kind that hid behind curtains until it found a wall. Agnes stepped back. "Don't you order me on my own porch!" Valor growled. Low. Warning. Agnes went still. Ryan moved fast, not rough, just certain. He entered the front room, crossed to the window, and found the old electric heater tucked behind a curtain printed with faded roses. The plug had browned at the socket. The cord was soft from heat. One more hour, maybe less, and Ruth's card would have become a death notice. Ryan killed the breaker while Nora guided Agnes into the kitchen and said all the gentle things in a tone that allowed no disobedience. The house smelled of dust, cinnamon, cat food, and the dry loneliness of rooms no one visited often enough. A gray cat watched Ryan from the top of the refrigerator with the disgust of a minor judge. "Ruth hated that heater," Agnes said from the kitchen. "Then why use it?" "Because Ruth is not here to fuss at me." Silence followed. Even the cat seemed to regret being alive in that sentence. Ryan removed the heater and checked the outlet. He tightened the porch rail, salted the steps, and cleared a load of snow from the east side where ice had formed a glassy slope. Nora found a fresh bag of cat litter in the hall closet exactly where Ruth's notes said it would be. Agnes pretended not to cry when Valor limped into the kitchen. The old canine placed his muzzle against her knee. Agnes set both hands on his head. "She brought you every Thursday," she whispered. "Said if I fell, she would climb out of heaven just to call me foolish." "She would," Nora said. "And she would bring forms." Agnes gave a small, wet laugh. Ryan looked away. There were photographs on the wall. Children in summer clothes, a husband in a fishing cap, a younger Agnes standing beside Ruth on a church lawn. Time had not abandoned the house. It had simply narrowed it. Maddie Collins arrived 10 minutes later after Nora called her from the kitchen phone. She was a young woman in a diner jacket under a parka, with auburn hair stuffed beneath a knit cap, tired green eyes, and the guilty posture of someone who had been running on too little sleep and too much love. "Grandma, I was coming after my shift." "I am not furniture," Agnes said. "I do not need scheduled dusting." Maddie saw the burned outlet and went pale. Ryan softened his voice. "She is all right." "Because of him." Maddie looked at Valor. The old dog had lowered himself onto the kitchen rug with the dignity of a king collapsing after battle. "Because Ruth left notes," Ryan said. "And because Valor remembered." Maddie knelt beside the shepherd, stopping short of touching until he allowed it. "I want to help." Agnes made a noise. "You have a job." "I also have a grandmother." Nora smiled into her coffee. "The child has discovered logistics." Ryan wrote Maddie's number on a blank card and added her to Agnes's check schedule. It felt strange making a mark in Ruth's system, as if you were writing in a Bible with a carpenter's pencil. When he drew a clean check beside Agnes Bell Valor's, tail moved once against the floor. Ryan saw it. So did Nora. No one said anything. They had learned already that naming some mercies made them shy. By noon, Derek Nolan arrived in a tow truck with chains on the tires and irritation fogging the windshield. He was a broad man with a square face, a gray beard, and a faded red flannel shirt under a grease-stained coat. He carried a safer heater, a box of fuses, and the wounded pride of a man dragged from his garage for a good cause. "I brought the heater," he said. "I did not bring patience." "No one asked for the rare item," Nora said. Derek grunted at Ryan. "You Ruth boy?" "Grandson." "Same problem, different haircut." Ryan decided he liked him too. They left Agnes's house with the wind pushing hard at their backs. Valor rode the sled now without protest, though his eyes tracked every dark window along the street. Ryan had hoped the first check would satisfy him. It did not. As they reached the corner, the power lines along Otter Creek shuddered under ice. One transformer popped with a blue flash muffled by the snow. Then the row of houses beyond the creek went black. Valor's head snapped up. He released a long, raw howl that cut through the wind and made every human on the street stop moving. Ryan pulled Ruth's yellow cards from his jacket with cold fingers. Samuel Pike, Otter Creek Road, oxygen machine, generator stubborn. Valor struggled to stand on the sled bandaged leg, shaking beneath him. Ryan looked toward the dark road where snow was already filling the tire tracks behind them. The first card was finished. The storm had chosen the second. Otter Creek Road lay under a hard white blur with spruce branches bent low, and the telephone lines ticking under coats of ice. The wind had shifted inland by early afternoon, driving snow sideways across the road until every yard ditch and driveway became the same blind sheet. Ryan drove as far as the truck could push, then stopped behind Derek's tow rig, where the plow berm rose like a frozen barricade. Nora stayed with Agnes and Maddie, which she announced as a temporary command decision and not a sign that anyone younger had won an argument. Deputy Grace Hollis arrived in the dark county SUV with chains on the tires and a yellow light turning slow on the roof. She stepped out into the storm with her collar up and her jaw set. Grace was lean and steady, with brown hair tucked under a black knit cap, hazel eyes that measured danger without blinking, and a deputy's jacket dusted white across the shoulders. She looked at Ryan, then at Valor on the sled. "That dog should be indoors." "He agrees with you in theory," Ryan said. Valor stared at the dark stretch of road. Grace did not smile. "Samuel Pike's power is out." "We know." "Then you also know his oxygen machine needs electricity." Derek lifted a toolbox from the tow rig. "Wonderful." "You have a problem with saving people?" Grace asked. "Only when weather participates." They moved together down the buried road, Ryan pulling Valor's sled while Derek dragged a generator battery pack and Grace carried a medical kit she claimed was standard issue. Ryan suspected standard issue did not include 2 thermoses, extra socks, and a tin of peanut butter crackers. Ruth would have approved. Samuel Pike's trailer sat at the end of a narrow drive lined with half-buried lobster traps and a mailbox shaped like a ship. The porch light was dead. The windows were fogged at the edges from cold inside meeting colder glass. Ryan knocked. No answer. Valor lifted his head and gave one sharp bark, thin but commanding. Something thumped inside. "I hear you," an old voice shouted. "I am not dead yet." Derek glanced at Grace. "That counts as cheerful in this neighborhood?" Samuel opened the door with a blanket around his shoulders and an oxygen tube beneath his nose. He was a dark-skinned man with wide shoulders, shrunken by age, a gray beard trimmed close along his jaw, and eyes that looked irritated to find anyone caring about him. "If Ruth sent you, she is late." Ryan felt the sentence strike everyone differently. Grace looked down. Derek pretended to inspect the doorframe. Valor pushed his nose forward from the sled. Samuel's scowl cracked at once. "Well now," he said, voice roughening. "The old sergeant came himself." They got him inside. The trailer smelled of cold coffee, wool blankets, machine oil, and the metallic dryness of oxygen tubing. The generator behind the trailer had stalled, and the portable battery for the oxygen machine was close to empty. Derek went outside, muttering about machines choosing drama like people chose bad marriages. Grace checked Samuel's pulse and oxygen level while Ryan examined the heater. Valor refused to remain on the sled. He slid down, awkwardly limped across the narrow room, and lowered himself beside Samuel's chair. Samuel's hand, broad and spotted with age, settled on the dog's head. She used to bring him when she wanted me to answer the door. Ruth? Ryan asked. No, the Queen of England. Samuel coughed, then waved off Grace's concern. Of course, Ruth. Ryan found the old man's medication organizer on the counter. 2 compartments were still full. You missed these. I was saving them. For what? A better mood. Grace took the pills gently, but with no room for argument. Take them now. Samuel glared at her. You sound like your father. The room changed, small, sharp. Ryan looked at Grace and saw her face harden with practiced speed. My father is not relevant. Valor's ears shifted toward her. Samuel snorted. People say that when someone is painfully relevant. Derek banged on the back wall from outside. Generator's flooded. Can you fix it? I can insult it until it cooperates. Ryan went out to help. The storm hit his face like handfuls of crushed glass. Derek had the generator cover off, snow already filling the gap. The fuel line was clogged with ice and old sediment. Ryan held the flashlight while Derek worked with gloved fingers that moved faster than his complaints. Ruth ever come out here in weather like this? Ryan asked. Derek barked a laugh. Ruth came out in weather that made fishermen find religion. Alone? With Valor. Derek pulled the line loose. Sometimes with me when she could shame me into it. She should have called for more help. She did. Ryan looked up. Derek's face was half hidden by his hood and blowing snow. People do not always answer the first time. The words were not accusations. They did not need to be. Inside, Grace helped Samuel take his medication and replace the oxygen battery with the spare Ruth's card said was in the hall closet under winter hats. Valor had found it before she had, nosing the closet door until Samuel cursed and admitted Ruth had put half his life in labeled places. When the generator coughed back to life, warm air began to move through the trailer. Samuel closed his eyes and breathed as if the room had become a harbor. Ryan marked the card. Samuel watched the pencil. She wrote me down. She wrote everybody down. Not everybody. The old man looked toward Grace. Some folks got circled. Grace was packing the medical kit. We are done here. Ryan pulled the cards from his pocket. Arthur Hollis sat near the bottom, circled twice. Your father? Grace's eyes met his. They were calm, in the way ice was calm before it cracked. He lives alone, but he knows how to handle storms. Samuel gave a dry cough. Knowing storms and surviving them are cousins, not twins. You should rest, Grace said. You should call your father. Derek made a low whistle. I like him. No one asked you, Grace and Samuel said together. For the first time all afternoon, Ryan almost smiled. They secured Samuel's trailer, checked the spare tank, wrote a call schedule, and tied a bright strip of cloth to the porch rail where it could be seen from the road. Before they left, Samuel gripped Ryan's sleeve. Ruth used to say Valor remembered people too proud to call. His eyes went to the dog. Looks to me like he still does. Valor stood with difficulty. His bandaged leg shook, but he turned toward Grace and stared. Not at Ryan. Grace. The deputy looked away first. Outside, the storm had thickened. The tire tracks from their arrival were almost gone. As they loaded Valor onto the sled, Grace's radio cracked on her shoulder. The sound was distorted by static wind and distance. Her hand flew to it.
Unit 3, say again. Only fragments came back. Harbor. Light. Arthur. Grace went perfectly still. Ryan watched the color drain from her face. The radio hissed, then delivered 2 words through the snow. Arthur. Light. Valor struggled upright on the sled, staring toward the bay road as if a dark window had just called his name. The storm wrapped the county SUV in white, and the road back from Otter Creek became a tunnel with no walls. Inside the vehicle, the heater roared. Wet gloves steamed on the dashboard, and Valor lay across 2 folded blankets with his injured leg stretched carefully between Ryan and the rear door. Grace drove with both hands tight on the wheel. Her jaw had not unclenched since the broken radio message. Ryan sat beside her with Ruth's yellow cards in his lap. Derek followed behind in the tow rig, headlights appearing and disappearing like 2 tired moons. "We should go to Arthur now," Ryan said. "We should confirm the signal." "You heard his name." "I heard static and 1 word that could have been a weather report, a bad relay, or Derek singing." The tow rig honked once behind them. Grace did not smile. Ryan looked through the windshield where snow erased the edge of the road. Ruth circled his card. Ruth circled lots of things. She wrote, "Ask twice, then go anyway." She did not know everything. Valor raised his head. The old canine stared at Grace through the rearview mirror. There was no judgment in him. That made it harder. Grace saw the look and turned her eyes back to the road. "My father worked storms before you were old enough to hold a compass. Then he knows how bad this is. He knows how to be alone." Ryan let that sit a moment. The wipers thumped. Ice hissed beneath the tires. "That is not the same skill." Grace breathed out through her nose. "Do not make this personal because your grandmother wrote it on a card. It was personal before she wrote it down." The words came out sharper than Ryan intended. Grace glanced at him. For a moment there was anger, then something beneath it, thinner and more human. "I missed Ruth's last call." Ryan looked at her. The SUV crawled past a buried stone wall. Grace kept speaking before courage could leave. "The night she died, dispatch was overloaded." "You were working?" "Yes." Her voice remained even, and Ryan recognized that kind of evenness. It was built, not born. "She called my personal phone too." "You did not answer." "I saw it later." The road vanished under a gust, and Grace slowed to a crawl. "She probably wanted me to check the north lane, or Arthur, or someone else who had decided weather was optional." "You do not know that." "I know she died in the storm." Valor made a low sound from the back. Grace's fingers tightened on the wheel. "Do not comfort me with guesses." Ryan looked down at Ruth's cards. He had come home carrying the same kind of arithmetic. Missed calls, unanswered letters, the exact weight of every time he had told himself later. "I am not comforting you," he said. "I am saying guilt is a bad dispatcher." Grace gave a short laugh without joy. "You rehearsed that?" "No." Ruth would have liked it. That hurt in a place Ryan had stopped naming. Back at Ruth's house, the kitchen had turned into a low-lit shelter of maps, damp Coates coffee, and the stove's orange glow. Nora had brought Agnes and Maddie over when the power flickered at Agnes's house again. Agnes sat near the stove with the gray cat in a carrier at her feet, complaining that emergency hospitality lacked decent curtains. Maddie sorted canned soup into crates with the solemn panic of someone newly recruited into a mission.
Derek arrived 5 minutes after Ryan and Grace, stomping snow from his boots and announcing that every road in town had become soup made of knives. No one asked him to define that. Ryan carried Valor to the blanket beside the table. The old dog was exhausted, but his eyes tracked the yellow cards. Laura Hayes arrived through the back door with medical supplies and a face that said several people were about to be lectured. "His bandage is bleeding again." Ryan looked down. Red had seeped through the wrap near Valor's wrist. "He walked too much." "He is not a lawnmower," Laura said.
You cannot keep using him until the blade falls off. Valor thumped his tail once, as if offended by the comparison. Laura knelt and changed the dressing while Ryan stood useless again. Nora poured Grace coffee and set it in front of her without asking. Grace did not drink. Her radio sat on the table hissing softly with bad reception. Derek took Ruth's handheld radio apart near the sink. "This thing has been patched 3 times. Can you make it work?" "I can make a toaster confess." That was not the question. It was the answer available. Ryan moved to the shoebox of letters on the sideboard. The blue thread had been tied with Ruth's particular neatness. He had walked past it 4 times. Now his hand went to it before he could stop himself. He opened the top letter. "Ryan," it began. "If you are reading this because I am gone, then I am annoyed at the timing, but not surprised by the Lord's sense of humor." He sat down. The room noise faded. Ruth's handwriting crossed the page in steady lines, practical and tender, with its sleeves rolled up. You were not made to be useful only to strangers. You were not made to save men in far places and then leave your own heart locked in a room because home asks quieter courage. Do not punish yourself by becoming unreachable. Valor knows the route because he came with me. But the route was never only about roads. It was about returning. Ryan closed his eyes. His throat ached. Valor's nose touched his boot under the table. Not by accident. The dog was lying several feet away, but he had stretched as far as he could to reach him. Ryan folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Derek tapped the radio with a screwdriver. "I have something." Everyone looked up. The radio spat static, then a faint, repeating tone. Derek turned the dial by a fraction. The tone sharpened. "Old light station frequency." Grace's head lifted. "Bass Harbor." "Not the official channel." Derek looked at her. "The old maintenance band." Nora went still. "Arthur." Grace stood. The chair legs scraped the floor. "That station is automated now." "Your father worked there," Ryan said. "He kept equipment." "He keeps everything." Nora placed both hands on the table. Ruth and Arthur had a signal. Grace closed her eyes once. When she opened them, she looked younger and more tired. "1 light for all right. 2 for supplies," Nora said. "No light means go now." Grace looked toward the window. Only White stared back. "His house has been dark 3 nights. The kitchen fell quiet. Even Agnes stopped complaining. Then the back door opened without a knock. Calvin Rhodes stepped in, carrying a legal envelope under one arm and snow on his expensive coat. "I need the keys to the property." Nora's coffee cup struck the counter hard. Laura rose slowly from beside Valor. Ryan saw it before anyone else did. A rust-colored smear ran across the cuff of Calvin's right sleeve, and a short, broken link of chain clung to a thread near his glove. Valor saw it too. The old canine lifted his head, and the growl that filled Ruth's kitchen was not weak at all. Night gathered early over Bar Harbor, though the snow made it impossible to tell where dusk ended and storm began.
Inside Ruth Keller's kitchen, the lamps burned yellow, the windows rattled, and every person in the room turned toward Calvin Rhodes as Valor's growl rolled across the floorboards. Calvin stopped with one boot still on the mat. His face tightened first in annoyance, then in recognition of the silence around him. Ryan stood slowly. "Take off the glove." Calvin looked at him. "Excuse me?" "The right glove." Grace's hand rested near her radio. Laura stepped between Valor and the door, not to protect Calvin, Ryan noticed, but to keep the dog from spending strength he did not have. Nora folded her arms. "Do it before I become less Christian." Calvin removed the glove. The broken chain link fell to the floor with a dull little click. No one moved. Small things could make large truths suddenly visible.
Ryan picked it up and held it against the oilcloth strip from Valor's collar. Same rust. Same oily residue. Laura's eyes lowered to the bandaged leg. "That chain cut him." "I did not chain him to a road sign," Calvin said. "Too fast. Grace heard it too." "Then explain why you have the chain." Calvin's mouth opened and closed. For once, paperwork failed him. "The dog was on the property." "His property?" Ryan asked. "The estate's." "Ruth's." "Soon to be transferred." Nora made a sound like a kettle beginning to boil. Calvin pushed on. "I hired a crew to clean the grounds and secure the animal. He had bitten at a contractor." Valor raised his head higher. His ears were forward now. "He stopped a stranger from entering Ruth's basement," Nora said. "The basement with supplies people need." Calvin looked toward the hall, and the glance told Ryan enough. He knew about the basement. Maybe not the whole thing. Enough. "Who chained him?" Grace asked. A man from the crew may have misunderstood. "Name? I would have to check." Grace took one step forward. "Check now." Calvin's polished confidence began to crack at the edges. "Deputy, this is a civil matter." "Animal cruelty is not civil." Laura's voice was calm enough to be frightening. "Neither is leaving an injured dog to freeze." Derek leaned against the sink with a wrench in his hand. "I am just here for the part where he stops talking like a brochure." Ryan had not moved beyond that first step. His stillness filled the room more than shouting would have. In the old life, he had learned to put anger into a box and label it for later use. The box was open now. Inside it were Valor's ribs under his hands, Ruth's cards on the table, and the image of an old dog chained in a storm because he had stood between a greedy man and a dead woman's work. "You will give Grace every name," Ryan said. "You will give me every key." Calvin tried to laugh. It came out wrong. "You do not have authority here." Ryan looked at the yellow lamps, the snow pressing against the glass, the old people and young people gathered under Ruth's roof because a dog had refused to die quietly. "No," he said. "But Ruth does." Nora's eyes flashed. Grace opened the legal envelope and found transfer forms, inspection notes, and a contractor receipt marked exterior animal removal. Calvin's face went gray. This was not supposed to happen this way. "Cruelty usually prefers privacy," Laura said. Grace photographed the documents and the chain link. She did not arrest Calvin then, not with Rhodes' closed calls pending and half the town sitting under dark skies. Instead, she made him sign a temporary access statement giving the household permission to use Ruth's basement supplies, storage shed, generator, radios, and garage until a state authority could be reviewed. Calvin signed because everyone watched him. Even Agnes's gray cat watched from its carrier with an expression of ancient contempt. When the pen left the paper, Nora took the keys from Calvin's hand.
Ruth always said you could tell a man's soul by how he treated a dog and a widow's property.
Calvin did not answer. He looked smaller by the door. Not sorry enough, but smaller.
You are not leaving town, Grace said. Roads are closed.
Derek smiled. Nature has joined law enforcement. Ryan took the shed keys and went outside with Derek, Grace, and a flashlight. The storm nearly shoved them back against the house. Behind the kitchen, Ruth's storage shed leaned under snow, its latch packed with ice. Inside, they found more crates, lanterns wrapped in newspaper, hand-crank radios, pet food, tarps, snowshoes, coils of rope, old life jackets, 2 sleds, a portable generator under a canvas cover. On the back wall hung another map, larger than the one in the basement, sealed in clear plastic. Ruth had drawn alternate routes in red pencil. Some followed lanes and driveways, some cut between yards and across old footpaths toward Acadia's edge. Near the bay, a thick red circle marked a stretch of road beside a tidal inlet. Do not cross near high tide if ice has lifted. Arthur Route. Grace stared at it, the stormlight reflected in her eyes.
She mapped my father's road.
Derek scratched his beard. She mapped everybody's road.
No. Grace touched the plastic over Arthur's name. This is the route he uses when he does not want anyone to know he is leaving the house.
Ryan looked at her. Would Ruth know that?
She knew because he taught it to her.
The wind slammed the shed door. All 3 of them turned. For a moment, Ryan could hear nothing but storm and the far unseen sea. Then from the house came Valor's bark. One sharp call. Ryan ran. Inside, Valor had dragged himself halfway across the kitchen. Laura was kneeling beside him, furious and worried. The old canine's nose pressed against the map Ryan had left on the table, specifically the Arthur card. Beside it lay one of Ruth's radios, now lit with a weak red signal. The old maintenance frequency pulsed again. Grace grabbed it. "Arthur Hollis, this is Deputy Hollis." Static. "Dad, answer me!" The room waited. No voice came. Only a dull tone repeating at uneven intervals. Derek leaned in. "That is not a voice. What is it?" "Beacon ping." Grace's face tightened. "From where?" Derek looked at the map. "Near the bay." Nora closed her eyes. "No light means go now." Ryan lifted Valor carefully before the dog tried to stand again. "We leave in 10. Laura's head snapped up. "He is not going." Valor stared at Ryan. His body was spent, his leg bandage wet again, his ribs moving too fast. But when Grace said Arthur's name under her breath, the old dog struck his tail once against the floor. Ryan remembered the oilcloth note. If the lanterns go dark, follow him. Outside, the storm pressed against the house like a hand over a mouth. On the map, the route to Arthur Hollis curved along the bay where tide and snow could swallow a road without leaving a trace. Grace looked at Ryan, and for the first time, she did not look like a deputy asking for a plan. She looked like a daughter, afraid she was already late. By the time they reached the Bay Road, night had fallen so thick that the snow seemed to create its own darkness. The wind swept across the inlet and hit the vehicle sideways, carrying needles of ice salt and torn spruce needles from the black trees above the shore. Grace drove the lead SUV until the road vanished beneath a drift higher than the hood. The tires spun once, then twice. Derek pulled up behind them, and the tow rig climbed out and used one short sentence to describe the entire weather system. Nora would have disapproved of the vocabulary and admired the accuracy.
Ryan stood in the headlights and studied Ruth's plastic map. The main road was gone. The alternate path cut inland through an old service lane, then crossed a rise above the tidal flat. Derek's garage had supplied an aging snowmobile and a cargo sled that looked as if it had survived 3 owners and 1 questionable parade. Laura stepped out of the SUV with Valor wrapped in blankets.
I am saying this as a medical professional.
No,
Ryan said.
that was not my sentence. It was going to be. Valor lifted his head from the blankets and stared toward the bay. The old dog had been quiet since they left Ruth's house, saving his strength in a way that worried Ryan more than resistance. Grace watched him and swallowed. He knows the route. He knows parts, Ryan said. Ruth knew the rest. Laura tightened the wrap around Valor's injured leg. If he puts weight on this for more than a few steps, you may be choosing between his leg and his life. Ryan looked at Valor. The shepherd's cloudy eyes held his. Once overseas, Ryan had sent this dog into a building because the mission required it. Valor had gone without hesitation. Now the mission required something harder from Ryan. Care. He rides, Ryan said. No walking unless there is no other choice. Valor gave a low rumble. That is not a negotiation. Derek snorted. You tell him, Commander.
I am not a commander.
Then he outranks you. Grace climbed onto the snowmobile behind Ryan, while Derek secured the cargo sled and Laura settled Valor into it with a blanket, a heat pack, and enough glare to warm the county. The machine coughed, choked, then started with a rattling roar. They moved into the white. The world shrank to the headlight beam, the map in Ryan's memory, and Grace's hand gripping the back of his jacket. Trees appeared suddenly on either side, black trunks rising like posts in a flooded field. The snowmobile bucked over buried roots. Behind them, the sled hissed and bumped, and every time Ryan glanced back, Valor's head was up, nose testing the air. After 10 minutes, Grace pointed left. Service lane. Ryan barely saw it. A gap in the spruce, a dip in the drift. Ruth had marked it with a red arrow and the words, Arthur uses this when avoiding people. Your father is consistent. He calls it independent. Ruth called it a medical risk with boots.
Grace gave a breath that might have become a laugh in another life. The lane rose toward a ridge above the bay. On the left, through breaks in the trees, Ryan saw the inlet below, black water moving beneath plates of ice. High tide had lifted chunks along the road and thrown them against the shore like broken glass. The main route would have been a trap. Ruth had known. Arthur's cabin appeared suddenly tucked between dark spruce and a low stone wall, its windows black, its roof loaded with snow. No porch light, no lantern, no smoke. Grace was off the machine before Ryan killed the engine. Dad? Her voice vanished in the wind. Ryan and Derek reached the door with tools. Ice sealed the frame. Grace pounded once, then twice. Arthur Hollis! Open the door! Nothing. Valor barked from the sled, weak but sharp. From inside came a scrape. Ryan put his shoulder to the door while Derek worked the jamb with a pry bar. The door gave with a crack of ice and swollen wood. Cold air met them from inside. Too cold. The cabin smelled of ashes, lamp oil, damp wool, and old coffee. Arthur Hollis sat on the floor beside a cold wood stove, wrapped in a blanket, one hand on a cane and the other near a dead radio. He was tall, even folded by weakness, with white hair combed back from a severe face, pale eyes, and the stubborn jaw of a man who had been saying no for so long it had become part of his bones. Grace dropped beside him. Dad. I was going to call, Arthur said.
His voice was dry as paper. "With what?" she snapped. "The radio is dead." "I was resting before repairing it." Derek looked at the cold stove. "That is a fancy word for freezing." Arthur glared at him. "Who are you? The man annoyed enough to save you?" Ryan checked the stove and found damp wood stacked too close to the door, where snow melt had reached it. The backup batteries were dead. The food pantry was thin. The medicine bottle on the table was nearly empty.
Arthur had not been managing. He had been conducting a quiet siege against his own need. Laura came in with Valor, despite her own warning, because the old dog began fighting the blankets the instant he smelled the cabin. Valor limped 3 steps, each one a small act of violence against pain, then sank beside Arthur's chair near the window. Arthur's face changed. "Ruth's dog." "Ryan's dog," Grace said, then softened. "Both, I guess." Arthur reached toward Valor, and the shepherd pressed his muzzle into the old man's palm. For a moment the cabin held still. All its stubbornness breathed. Grace wrapped a warmer blanket around her father. "Why did you not call me? You were working. I am your daughter." "You were working and angry." "I was angry because you do this." "I do this because everyone leaves eventually." The words struck the room. Grace sat back as if slapped. Ryan saw grief move between father and daughter like a thing with its own weather. Arthur's wife had died 2 years earlier. Since then, he had turned the cabin into a lighthouse without a lamp. Valor, either by memory or mercy, dragged his nose toward an old brass lantern box beneath the table. Derek opened it. Inside were dry batteries, a hand-crank beacon, and a heavy lamp fitted with a rotating lens. Grace stared. "You kept the old signal light." Arthur's mouth tightened. "Ruth liked it. Ruth used it. Ruth knew how to ask without making a man feel small." "Maybe you made that impossible." Arthur flinched. No one moved. Then Ryan heard Valor whine. Not at them. At the window. The old canine had raised his head toward the dark glass. Ryan followed his gaze. Arthur, suddenly alert, reached for the lamp. "Turn it." Derek snapped the battery leads into place. The old beacon sputtered once, then cast a pale cone of light through the snow. Arthur rotated the beam by instinct. The light swept the trees, the buried lane, the edge of the tidal flat. Then it caught metal. Far below the ridge, half buried in a roadside ditch, a small car lay on its side with one wheel turning slowly in the storm. Grace stood. "No." Ryan saw a hand strike weakly against the inside of the windshield. Valor tried to rise. This time Ryan did not tell him no. He only lifted the rope from his pack and ran toward the door. The slope below Arthur Hollis's cabin fell away into a storm so dense that the snow seemed to rise from the ground as much as fall from the sky. Arthur's old signal lamp swept across the ridge in slow white arcs, and each pass revealed the overturned car below for one heartbeat before the darkness swallowed it again. Ryan tied a rescue rope around his waist while Grace looped the other end around the porch post and braced herself beside her father. Derek clipped a second line to a spruce trunk and cursed the wind with such precision that Arthur briefly looked impressed. "Someone is moving," Grace said. Ryan saw it. A pale hand struck the inside of the windshield again, weak, slowing. Valor barked from the doorway, the sound rough and broken by pain. Laura had one hand on his collar, not pulling, just keeping him from dragging himself into a rescue that would finish what the chain had started. "Stay," Ryan told him.
Valor trembled, his eyes fixed on the car. Ryan knew that look.
It was the same look the dog had worn years ago, when rubble still shifted, and a man under concrete was breathing through dust. The old canine had not forgotten what a trapped life smelled like.
Ryan,
Laura warned. I know. He slid over the ridge and into the snow. Cold closed around him at once. The drift came to his thighs, then his hips when he hit the lower ground. The rope tightened behind him. Grace shouted something, but the wind tore the words apart. Ryan moved toward the car by memory lamp flash and the faint metallic rhythm of someone striking glass. Halfway down, the ground gave under his left foot. Ice crust cracked. Water black as oil showed beneath snow. The tidal ditch. He flattened himself and spread his weight, breathing slowly while the cold bit through his gloves. Arthur's lamp swung across the slope again. In that brief light, Ryan saw the safer line along a buried fence. Valor barked once from above. Not random. Left. Ryan shifted left. The fence wire brushed his boot. He followed it to the car. The vehicle was a small blue sedan lying against a snowbank roof, dented, passenger side high, driver side, half buried. Inside, Maddie Collins stared at him through cracked glass eyes, wide and unfocused. Her diner jacket was torn at the shoulder. Her lips were blue. Against her chest, under her coat, she clutched a plastic pharmacy bag. "Maddie!" Ryan shouted. "Can you move?" Her mouth formed words. No sound came through. Ryan cleared snow from the rear window and struck the glass with the rescue punch. Once. Twice. The third strike broke it. Cold air rushed into the car. Maddie flinched. "I was taking Agnes's medicine," she whispered. "Stay with me." "I thought I could beat the road." "Nobody beats a road in Maine," Ryan said. "They only negotiate with it." Her laugh was barely breath. He cut the seatbelt, wrapped a thermal blanket around her, and guided her through the broken rear window inch by inch. The rope pulled tight as Grace and Derek took the weight from above. Maddie cried out when her ankle twisted against the frame. Ryan kept his voice low and steady. "Look at the lamp." Arthur's beam swept over them again. "When it hits us, we move." The next pass came. Ryan pushed. Grace pulled. Derek hauled with a grunt that traveled down the rope like a promise. They dragged Maddie up the slope one painful yard at a time. Near the ridge, Valor broke Laura's hold. He did not run. He could not. He stumbled 3 steps into the snow and planted himself at the top of the slope, body shaking, eyes locked on Ryan. Laura caught him but did not drag him back. Maybe she understood. Maybe everyone did. Maddie's hand reached up through the snow. Valor lowered his head and touched his nose to her glove. "Good boy," Maddie breathed. Then she fainted. They got her inside Arthur's cabin and stripped off the wet outer layers while Laura checked her temperature, pulse, and ankle. Grace moved with crisp focus. Warming blankets, heating water, calling the clinic and checking the roads by radio. Her hands shook only when she thought no one looked. Arthur saw. He stood near the old lamp, pale and unsteady, but he kept turning the beam out the window every few seconds, as if the storm had appointed him keeper of everyone below the ridge. "You held the line well," Ryan said. Arthur kept his eyes on the glass. "Ruth said a light was useless unless someone stayed awake to tend it." Grace looked up from Maddie's side. "She said that?" "Often." Arthur's mouth worked once. "Usually while accusing me of sleeping in my chair." Derek added wood to the stove. "Was she wrong?" "She was rarely wrong in a manner I enjoyed." The room warmed by degrees. Maddie woke enough to ask about the medicine bag.
Agnes's prescriptions were dry. So were the cat's special kidney tablets, which Derek declared the most emotionally expensive medicine he had ever seen.
Grace looked at Maddie, anger and admiration tangled on her face. You could have died. Agnes needed them. You needed to call.
I did.
Maddie's eyes filled.
No one answered because everyone was already out saving someone else. The sentence settled in the room like snow on a grave. Ryan felt the old ache again. Unanswered calls, unfinished routes. He looked at Valor. The old dog lay beside the stove, head down, leg bleeding through the bandage again. His breathing was shallow. Laura noticed at the same moment. She knelt, checked his gums, and went very still. He is crashing from pain and exhaustion. Ryan was beside them at once. What do you need? A surgical room, clear roads, and time. None of those existed. Valor's eyes opened. They found Ryan, then drifted to Arthur's lamp, then to the yellow card sticking from Ryan's pocket. Even now, even with his body failing, the old dog was still tracking the list. Grace's radio cracked. Derek grabbed it from the table.
The message came through broken, but clear enough. Community center roof load critical. Nora's voice followed thin with static. We have evacuees here. Ryan's head lifted. Nora had moved Agnes and others to the center when power failed across town. How many? Static swallowed the answer. Then Nora came back, strained but steady. Too many for the roof if it keeps snowing. Derek looked at the ceiling. Grace looked at her father. Arthur looked at the lamp. Ryan looked at Valor, lying between life and duty on the cabin floor. The old canine's tail moved once. Not enough to make a sound. Enough to be an order. Ryan took Ruth's map from his coat. Then we moved them to Ruth's house. Outside, the beacon swept the storm again, and Bar Harbor waited in the dark. Near midnight, Ruth Keller's house shone through the blizzard like a lantern set low beside the harbor. Snow buried the porch steps, crowded the windows, and softened the roofline. But inside, the rooms filled with voices, wet boots, lamp glow, and the stubborn heat of people refusing to vanish quietly. Ryan carried Valor in first. Laura followed close behind, one hand against the old dog's ribs, counting each breath as if numbers could bargain with heaven. Nora had already turned the living room into a shelter. Agnes sat in Ruth's armchair with her gray cat glaring from a blanket on her lap. Samuel Pike occupied the couch near an outlet connected to Derek's portable generator, oxygen tube in place, dignity offended by the floral quilt over his knees. Maddie, pale but awake, sat by the stove with her ankle wrapped and a notebook open across her lap. She had insisted on writing names because she said terror made her handwriting cleaner. Grace arrived with Arthur, who refused help from everyone except his daughter, and pretended that exception did not count. He brought the old signal lamp under one arm. Derek hauled in the radio gear. Then Calvin Rhodes appeared behind him, carrying 2 crates of canned food and wearing the expression of a man who had discovered shame was heavier than legal folders. Nora saw him. Set those by the pantry, and do not expect forgiveness to be alphabetized. Calvin nodded once. He looked at Valor on the blanket near the table. Will he live? Ryan did not answer. Laura did without looking up. He has been living harder than most creatures should have to. That shut Calvin's mouth. Ryan spread Ruth's map over the kitchen table. The 12 yellow cards lay beside it, damp at the edges from travel and use. Agnes, Samuel, Arthur. Several were checked now. Too many were not. The community center roof could not take more snow, and the town's official shelters were beyond blocked roads.
Ruth's house,
with its basement stores, working stove generator radios, and stubborn porch light, had become the only command post left. Ryan looked around the kitchen. Old faces, young faces, tired faces. People who had come for rescue and now waited for instruction. In a different life, he would have given orders with clipped certainty. In this kitchen, that would not work. Ruth had not built obedience. She had built belonging. "I need callers," Ryan said. Maddie lifted her hand. "I can call." Agnes sniffed. Her handwriting is indecently neat when frightened. "Good," Ryan said. "You write every response." He turned to Samuel. "You know the Otter Creek houses." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "I know who lies." "Even better." Samuel sat a little taller. "Give me a phone." Nora took the widows along the harbor lanes because she knew which ones would answer for her and which ones would answer only after being insulted with affection. Derek took machinery generators, and any house where the word heater appeared in Ruth's notes. Laura paired animal needs with human checks because Ruth had written that people would confess a hungry dog before they confessed an empty refrigerator. Grace took emergency roads and medical risks. Arthur, after 10 minutes of claiming he was not joining anything, placed the signal lamp on the sideboard and began marking which windows could be seen from the Bay Road. "If the weather clears even 2 degrees, I can send a lamp code to 3 houses from here." Grace looked at him. "You remember the code?" "I invented half of it." Ruth said she improved it. Ruth also said my coffee tasted like boiled rope. "It does," Samuel said. Arthur looked at him. "You drink instant coffee with powdered creamer." "And still I judge." The room laughed. It was small, exhausted laughter, but it warmed something no stove could reach. Ryan stood beside Valor as the house became motion. Calls went out. Radios crackled. Cards moved across the table. Calvin shoveled a path from the porch to the shed without complaint, then returned with more fuel and a donation envelope he set near Nora without meeting her eyes. Nora opened it, counted the cash, and said, "This is not penance, but it is lumber." Calvin nodded again. "For repairs," he said. "For whoever needs them." Ryan saw no redemption in him yet, but he saw a first useful act. Sometimes the first useful act had to be allowed, if only because storms did not wait for perfect people. Valor lay with his head near the map. Whenever a name was confirmed safe, his tail moved. Once for Mrs. Alder, whose son had reached her. Once for the Whitley sisters, who were both insulted by the implication that they could not outlive weather. Once for a retired Marine named Paul Reed, who admitted his heater was dead only after Samuel threatened to visit personally. Laura changed Valor's bandage again. The bleeding slowed, but the leg was swollen and hot under her fingers. "He needs surgery at Bangor," she told Ryan quietly. "Can he wait?" Laura's silence answered first. "Until dawn, maybe." Ryan touched Valor's head. "Roads." Grace looked up from the radio. "Still closed." Derek checked the weather band. "Plows are stuck east of town." Arthur turned the lamp toward the front window and tested a slow sweep through the snow. "The wind may drop before morning." Nora at the phone suddenly straightened. "Evelyn Marsh is not answering." Maddie ran her finger down Ruth's notebook. "Evelyn Marsh, Acadia Edge, waits by window, too proud to call. Ask about the cat." Samuel closed his eyes. "She will sit there under a quilt until the walls freeze." Ryan picked up the card. The address sat near a road already marked in red on Ruth's map, blocked by trees and ice storms,
No vehicle access after heavy drift. He looked at Valor. The old canine had lifted his head. His eyes were open, fixed on the card.
No, Ryan said softly. Valor's tail struck once. Ryan's chest tightened. This was the hardest command. Not the one to go, the one to stay. He knelt beside the dog and placed his palm on the sable head. I will go. Valor stared at him. And I will come back. The old dog's breathing hitched, but he did not rise. Ryan stood and looked at Grace and Derek. Evelyn Marsh. Grace grabbed her coat. Derek groaned. I was hoping for a nice indoor catastrophe. Arthur lifted the signal lamp. You will need a fixed light to find the lane. Grace looked at her father. Can you hold it? Arthur's answer was quiet. For you, yes. Ryan took Ruth's hand-drawn map, a rope, and the yellow card. Behind him, Valor lay by the door, not chasing, not fighting, only watching through pain as the people he had gathered walked into the storm in his place. The wind began to tire before dawn, but the snow did not. It fell straight down now over the road toward Acadia's edge, thick and silent, covering the world in a whiteness that made every tree seem older than memory. Ryan, Grace, and Derek left Ruth's house on foot because no truck tow rig or snowmobile could pass the fallen spruce blocking Marsh Lane. Arthur stood on Ruth's porch behind them, with the old signal lamp braced against the rail. Each slow sweep of light cut a pale path through the white and gave the three of them something to aim for when the lane disappeared. Ryan carried Ruth's map under his coat, close to his chest. Grace carried the medical kit and a coil of rope. Derek dragged a small sled loaded with blankets, water, tools, and one can of cat food that Nora had thrown in with the grave seriousness of a priest placing a relic. If we die, Derek said, I want it known I objected to the cat food. Noted, Grace said. In your official report, Say I was handsome and practical.
I will say you were present. Ryan almost laughed. The sound surprised him enough that he looked back toward the house. Through the snow, he could still see the yellow glow in Ruth's windows. Valor was inside alive for now, lying by the door because Ryan had promised to return. The promise pulled him forward harder than duty. Marsh Lane narrowed between spruce trees heavy with snow. The fallen trunk blocked the old driveway exactly where Ruth had marked it might. Derek cleared branches with a folding saw while Ryan and Grace climbed over, then hauled the sled through. Beyond the tree, the silence deepened. No engines, no sea. Only the soft crush of boots and the occasional crack of ice high in the branches. Grace's face was pale with cold, but her eyes had changed since Arthur's cabin. The hard surface remained. Under it, something had thawed enough to hurt. He held the lamp, she said. Ryan knew she meant her father. He did.
When I was little, he used to bring me to the old station.
She stepped over a buried stone. He told me light did not stop storms. It shows people where not to give up. Grace glanced at him. Ruth said that too. Sounds like her. No. Grace looked ahead. That was him. They reached Evelyn Marsh's house as the first gray suggestion of morning touched the clouds. It was a small, cedar-shingled place tucked at the edge of the woods, with a porch buried to the railing and windows filmed with frost from the inside. No light showed. Ryan knocked. Nothing. Grace pounded harder. Evelyn Marsh, deputy's office. Still nothing. Derek looked at Ruth's card. Spare key under the ceramic frog. They found the frog frozen to the porch. Derek hit it lightly with the back of the saw. "I am sorry, decorative citizen." The frog came loose with the key beneath it. Inside, the air was dangerously cold. The house smelled of cedar, lavender, old books,
and the sour edge of a wood stove, gone out. Ryan swept the flashlight across the living room. Evelyn Marsh sat by the front window under two quilts, white hair loose around her shoulders, thin hands wrapped around a bundle beneath her sweater. For one terrible second, she did not move. Then the bundle meowed. Evelyn opened her eyes. "Ruth," she whispered. Grace knelt beside her. "No, ma'am." Ryan lowered himself into Evelyn's line of sight. Ruth sent notes. The old woman's eyes focused slowly. She was small, with delicate bones, pale skin, and eyes the color of faded denim. The gray cat under her sweater glared at Ryan with admirable commitment to suspicion. "I was waiting," Evelyn said. "For who?" "The dog." Ryan's throat tightened. "He wanted to come." "He always came." Her voice thinned. "Ruth would knock twice, then once with her ring." Grace checked Evelyn's pulse. "We need to move her now." Derek got the stove breathing again, long enough to warm blankets and fill hot water bottles. But the chimney draft was poor, and the wood was nearly gone. Ryan found the medication Ruth had listed in a blue tin on the bookshelf. Evelyn had missed doses, not from neglect, from weakness. They wrapped her in blankets and secured the cat in a carrier that appeared to have been attacked by time and one previous cat with strong opinions. The return trip took twice as long. Evelyn was light, but the sled sank in soft drifts, and Derek's breath grew harsh as he pulled. Grace took the rope and hauled beside him without a word. Ryan broke trail, following Arthur's faint lamp sweep whenever the trees opened. Once the whiteout closed so fully that the house vanished and the path behind them disappeared. Grace stopped. "I lost the light." Ryan turned slowly. Snow folded around them. No porch, no lane, no sound from the harbor. Then a beam flashed low through the trees. One sweep. A pause. Two sweeps. Arthur was sending a code. Grace's face changed. "Left." They shifted left and found the old stone wall that Ruth had marked as the safe line. Arthur's lamp pulsed again. Grace laughed, once breathless and close to tears. "Stubborn man." "Useful stubborn," Ryan said. "Family trait." "Careful." They reached Ruth's porch just as dawn turned the storm from black to pearl. Arthur stood there shaking with effort, but the lamp was still in his hands. Grace climbed the steps and put one arm around him. He did not pull away. That small surrender seemed to cost him more than the cold. Inside the house received Evelyn like a ship taking in a survivor. Nora guided her to the warmest chair. Agnes introduced the two cats with the solemn dread of a diplomat negotiating peace. Samuel declared that both animals looked better organized than the county. Ryan stepped into the hall. Valor was there by the door, still awake, still waiting. The old canine had not broken the command. He had not dragged himself after Ryan. He had trusted him. Ryan knelt and pressed his forehead to Valor's. "I came back." Valor's eyes closed. His tail moved once against the floor. Laura appeared behind them, pale from worry and lack of sleep. "The road to Bangor is opening." Ryan looked up. "When?" "Now if Derek can get one last machine to behave." Derek shouted from the kitchen. "I heard that, and the machine knows what it did." For the first time since the storm began, light came through Ruth's front window with no snow between it and the glass. Then Grace's radio crackled from the table.
The veterinary ambulance was stuck on the final hill before the house, engine, running wheels buried. Valor opened his eyes. Ryan stood. Derek grabbed his coat. Arthur lifted the lamp again. The storm had ended, but the last climb still stood between Valor and morning.
Morning after the nor'easter came to Bar Harbor soft, bright, and almost unbelievable. Snow covered the town in high white banks. The harbor lay gray and still beneath a pale sun, and every roof dripped slowly, as if winter had finally lowered its voice. The veterinary ambulance was stuck halfway up the hill to Ruth's house, its wheels buried in churned snow, and its driver standing beside it with the expression of a man who had learned humility from a driveway. Derek hitched his tow rig to the ambulance while Calvin shoveled beside him without his expensive coat, face red from cold and shame. Grace cleared traffic that did not exist because some people needed a badge even when the only witnesses were snowbanks. Arthur stood on the porch with the old signal lamp casting light across the drive, though the sun was already up. Nora held the door open. Ryan carried Valor through it. The old canine was wrapped in Ruth's quilt, his sable head resting against Ryan's chest. One silver ear folded back, eyes half open. "Stay with me," Ryan said. Valor breathed against his jacket. The ambulance reached the porch after one last pull from Derek's truck and one last push from nearly everyone capable of standing. Laura climbed in beside Valor. Ryan followed. Nora pressed Ruth's folded red scarf into his hand before the doors closed. She would want him warm. The ride to Bangor took hours. Roads were cleared in strips, plows still working trees down in half the lanes. Ryan sat beside Valor and read Ruth's letters one by one, while Laura monitored the old dog's breathing. The first letter made him smile. The second broke him open. By the fifth, he understood that Ruth had not written to accuse him. She had written to keep a door unlocked. "You do not have to become a man who never leaves," one letter said. "You only have to become a man who knows when to return." Ryan folded that page and placed it beside Valor's head. "She was talking to both of us," he whispered. Valor's tail moved under the quilt. The surgery took most of the afternoon. Ryan waited in a plastic chair outside the operating room with dried snow on his boots and Ruth's scarf twisted in both hands. Grace arrived with coffee. She had Arthur with her, though he claimed he was only there because hospitals had chairs, and chairs were public resources. Nora came next, then Derek, then Maddie, then Agnes, with both cats represented through angry stories rather than physical attendance. Samuel called 3 times and complained that no one had given him a proper update, which everyone took as a sign that he was fine. When Laura came out, her face was tired, but not defeated. "He keeps the leg." Ryan stood too quickly. "He lives. He lives." Laura's mouth softened. "He will limp." Ryan laughed once, sharp and breathless. "He always did when he wanted sympathy." "Then he will have a distinguished future." Valor came home 3 days later, thinner, slower, and more offended by medical instructions than any patient in the state of Maine. He wore a clean bandage, a new support brace, and Ruth's red scarf folded near his blanket like a small flag. When Ryan carried him into Ruth's house, every person in the kitchen stood, without anyone deciding to. Nora cried openly and denied it with no credibility. Derek pretended the stove smoke had attacked him. Arthur saluted the dog with 2 fingers. Valor looked around the room, saw the yellow cards pinned now to a corkboard, and gave one weak thump of his tail. No one sold Ruth's house. Calvin withdrew the transfer after Grace's investigation, then paid into a repair fund that Nora named the Do Better account with unnecessary cheer. The town council offered language about community resilience,
which Agnes called words wearing dress shoes. Ryan kept Ruth's name on the mailbox. He also added another sign beside the porch, carved by Derek, with letters that leaned slightly because Derek refused to measure sentiment. Ruth and Valor Harbor Lantern Watch. Below it, in smaller words, no dark window left alone. The network started with 12 yellow cards. By spring, there were 42. Elderly widows, retired fishermen, veterans who disliked forms, people with old dogs, people with medical machines, people whose children lived too far away and called too late at night with worry in their voices. Maddie organized volunteers from the diner and the church basement. Samuel ran phone checks with the authority of a man who considered small talk a strategic weapon. Agnes supervised porch safety and claimed her cat could detect bad wiring by moral instinct. Derek repaired generators, radios, railings, and one bird feeder he insisted did not count as charity. Nora became keeper of the basement inventory and frightened 3 grown men into labeling soup correctly.
Grace and Arthur rebuilt their relationship, one signal at a time.
Some evenings, father and daughter stood on Ruth's porch with the old lamp and practiced codes across the bay. They still argued. That was how they loved, without panicking. Arthur took the radio desk during storms, and Grace stopped treating every request for help as proof that someone had failed. Ryan stayed. At first, he told himself it was temporary, because men trained to leave often needed language soft enough to fool themselves. Then he accepted a winter rescue instructor position, trained veterans in search routes, and helped Laura build a small canine recovery program for retired working dogs with old injuries and too much pride. Valor became its first official resident and unofficial inspector. He limped through the house with grand seriousness, accepted treats only after making people work emotionally for them, and slept by the front door whenever snow began to fall. He never again had to run alone into a storm.
On the first anniversary of Ruth's death, the town gathered outside the house under a cold, clear sky. The harbor was black and bright with reflected stars. Every participating home placed one lantern in the front window. One by one, lights appeared across Bar Harbor along Otter Creek near Acadia's edge, out by the bay where Arthur's house glowed steady and warm. Ryan stood on Ruth's porch with Valor beside him. The old canine leaned against his leg, the brace on his right front paw catching a little moonlight. Grace stood with Arthur near the lamp. Nora held Ruth's scarf around her shoulders. No one made a speech. They did not need one. Ryan rested his hand on Valor's head and looked over the town Ruth had refused to let disappear. He had once believed loyalty meant never leaving. Then an old dog chained in a blizzard taught him the harder truth. Sometimes loyalty means coming back late, kneeling in the snow, cutting the chain, and carrying forward the light someone else kept burning for you. Sometimes God's mercy does not arrive as thunder or a sudden answer or a perfect rescue at the perfect hour. Sometimes it comes as one porch light left on in a storm, one neighbor who refuses to stop calling, one wounded dog who still remembers the road home, and one person brave enough to return after years of silence. Valor's story reminds us that no life should be left chained to pain, and no older person should sit behind a dark window wondering if the world has forgotten them. Love is not wasted when it is delayed, if we let it change what we do next. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it can turn regret into service. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen, and tell us about someone who kept a light burning for you. Share this with a friend or family member who needs hope tonight, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances. May God bless your home. protect those you love, comfort every lonely heart, and guide you safely through every storm.